The story of America's long and tortuous journey to social reformation, freedom and equality for the black race will not be complete without mentioning the struggles and triumphs of Frederick Douglass. The man who came to be known as the Lion of Anacostia is a highly revered figure in the historic fight against slavery and racial discrimination in the United States. His life is an enduring reminder of the tremendous success that can come out of a life's work of devotion and sacrifice for a just cause. The young Frederick, who was born into slavery, would later become a towering figure in the socio-political affairs of slave era and post-slavery America. America's sordid slavery era past left an indelible trail of agony, anguish, and regrets in its wake for the black man. It was a time when African Americans were subjected to some of the worst types of human debasement and treatment due to the color of their skin. This dire situation and the hope of a better future would inspire a group of people to rise to the occasion, and Frederick Douglass was one of such prominent people. His impact and life's work transcended his many impressive writings, speeches, and wartime action. He would later become a leading voice in the discourse to promote America's post-war and post-slavery acceptance of the black man in the country's social, economic, and political fabric. You are welcome to yet another installment of the People's Journals series. In today's episode, we look at the impressive story of Frederick Douglass and his inspiring journey of sacrifice, commitment, and tenacity in the face of adversity. Before we take you on this exciting journey, please take a moment to click on the like button and tap the subscribe button on the notification bell so you don't miss out on several other fascinating stories like this one. To give you a background look at what our story seeks to reveal, we go way back to 1818 in Cordova, Maryland, the year and place where the hero of this story was born. Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey to his equally enslaved mother, Harriet Bailey, and a father he never knew but once acknowledged in his biography as his mother's white master. Born into slavery at the time, Frederick Douglass was separated from his mother not long after his birth. He would eventually be taken from his maternal grandmother, whom he lived with until he was 6. The boy would endure the death of his mother less than a year later, while working at White House Plantation in the house of his master. While witnessing firsthand the harsh realities of several other enslaved people in the plantations and the household where he lived, Frederick Douglass decided to commit to the emancipation of his fellow black men. His experiences growing up on the plantation under the supervision of his then masters, Aaron Anthony, later Thomas Auld, and then his brother, Hugh Auld, shaped his steely resolve. Early in his life, Frederick Douglass strived to make the best of his living conditions. While working under the Auld household, he started learning to read after being taught by the wife of his master, a woman who initially treated him nicely. This luxury was later lost after his master found out and banished him from education, saying that it encouraged enslaved people to seek freedom. Frederick is said to have learned to read from the people he worked with, and by exchanging bread with other poor white neighborhood kids who taught him to read. After secretly reading several books and political materials, Frederick Douglass was inspired to question the slavery subject. It was not until after he met and fell in love with Anna Murray, a free woman, that he started to imagine the possibility of living as a free man. Douglass would later dare to embark on a risky escape journey that took him through Baltimore, Maryland, and Delaware to Philadelphia, all under a day. Frederick Douglass is remembered for boarding the Philadelphia-bound train, dressed as a sailor with papers obtained from a black seaman with help from Anna Murray. Frederick later relocated to New York and married Anna Murray, bringing us full circle to the start of the incredible story of his fight against racial discrimination and oppression. After settling in Massachusetts with his wife and growing family, Douglass started to learn the art of oratory at a black denomination church, a skill that would become one of his greatest weapons. He held several positions at the church, joined several organizations, and was frequently seen at several abolitionist meetings. Massachusetts was then a hub of the abolitionist movement, and Douglass would further commit himself to the anti-slavery cause that sprouted on all sides in the city. Frederick Douglass spent his time touring the northern states, giving inspiring speeches based on his time in slavery and his commitment to pushing for freedom. Yet his meeting with William Lloyd Garrison, a prominent white abolitionist, a rarity at the time, shaped his future experiences. After being impressed by a speech Douglass delivered at an anti-slavery convention held in 1941, Harrison was motivated to hire the young Douglass to work in the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. Working as a lecturer with the society, Douglass continued to give several speeches across several cities. His lectures were themed on the horrors of slavery, culminating in the 1845 publication of his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an Enslaved American. The book grew immensely on the one hand, evoking critical reviews from people who doubted a black man's literacy, and on the other hand, inspiring several other black men, anti-colonialists and abolitionists. His book was so successful that it helped him with the funds he used to secure his legal freedom from his master. Frederick's growing influence as a black man in America at the time meant that he almost always had a target at his back. Several times, he was accosted by people who held on to racial stereotypes and others envious of his work and success. Sometime in September 1841, Frederick Douglass was kicked out of an Eastern Railroad train for protesting against the way the sitting arrangement was made to promote segregation. 2 years later, he was assaulted by an angry mob at a lecture in Indiana, and his hand was severely damaged. Douglass never quite recovered from the injuries sustained from this incident, but he did not let them distract him from his lifelong dream and mission. As he grew older, he became more motivated, all while maintaining the graces and appeal that resonated in high places. The older Frederick later had a reputation for being the most photographed black man of his generation, and his stern posture in all of these pictures is symbolic of the seriousness with which he considered his mission. Douglass later moved to Dublin, Ireland, and then to England, where he continued promoting anti-slavery ideologies and proposed abolishing the slave system in colonialist enclaves. His fame spread as he continued this journey, making him a few influential friends. He lectured everywhere, from chapels to churches, and his influence helped him raise funds to officially obtain his legal freedom from Thomas Auld with the help of some of his new friends. While Douglass was treated with much more respect in these places, the plight of his brothers back home disturbed him and influenced his subsequent return to America in 1847. Armed with about £500 in donations gotten from his British supporters, Douglass set up the abolitionist newspaper, the North Star, in Rochester, New York, where he lived. Frederick Douglass continued championing the right of the black man to freedom and equality with his newspaper and subsequent efforts through various speeches and writings. Frederick opposed the proposal by the American Colonization Society to send free black people back to Africa. He was also critical to the growth of the Underground Railroad, a metaphor for a movement that covertly helped enslaved people move from places where they were enslaved to free states. At least 400 fugitive slaves are said to have been lodged and catered to at his house, and he didn't stop there. Douglass was also a champion of women's rights and was famously remembered for attending the first women's rights convention, the Seneca Convention, as the only black man there. His speech at the convention favoring the requests for more women's involvement in politics was one of his best-known ones, and his subsequent use of his newspaper to further promote women's rights is well documented. Douglass's push for universal suffrage attracted serious pushback, and his push for equality would continue to the Civil War era that is discussed next. The Civil War marked a period where Frederick Douglass's impact was felt away from the podium and the pages of books. Douglass is known for using his influence to lobby then-President Abraham Lincoln to allow black soldiers to fight on the Union side. His rallying point was that since the Civil War was fought on the themes of slavery and equality, it would be imperative and symbolic to allow them to fight for their freedom. After echoing this view through many publications and speeches, his wish was granted, and he went on to lead the recruitment efforts, with 3 of his sons joining his wartime campaign. More than 1,000 black men would later join the Union side during the war, thanks to concerted efforts by Frederick and his team to enlist them. Frederick's several discussions with President Lincoln helped promote black American people's interests, leading to the Emancipation Proclamation on the 1st of January, 1863. His efforts to promote equality and inclusion for the black man continued after the death of President Lincoln. On the 6th of December 1885, after the war had ended, the 13th Amendment was ratified thanks to efforts by people like Frederick Douglass. The law made slavery illegal, only allowing it to serve as punishment for a crime committed. It was the first of several critical reforms that had been passed. The 14th Amendment followed suit, allowing for citizenship by birthright, and then the 15th Amendment proscribed all forms of voter discrimination against citizens due to their race. These amendments would not have been possible without the efforts of leading figures like Frederick Douglass. Douglass's voice was a voice of reason that spoke to the American consciousness. His presence near the corridor of power resonated across the country and resulted in the proclamation of several laws that helped shape the future of the black man in America. Douglass's civil rights activism campaign extended to the Reconstruction era, and he is credited with the political influence that resulted in the passage of several rights-centered laws. The Reconstruction era marked a time when there was a growing increase in the spread of segregation and white supremacy. Backed by several paramilitary groups, such as the White League and the Red Shirts, armed insurgents started to creep back into national consciousness. Their ideologies clashed with those of people like Douglass, threatening years of hard work spent challenging the discriminatory status quo. This group soon took control of the Democratic Party and seized most of the political power at the time. In no time, they were rallying to begin the disenfranchisement of black Americans and introduce laws encouraging segregation. Frederick Douglass and others at the forefront of black civil rights knew they had to step up or risk witnessing the undoing of years of sweat and blood. To tackle this menace, Douglass decided to back the presidential campaign of Ulysses Grant in 1868. 2 years later, he launched his final newspaper, The New National Era, in a bid to ensure that the country upheld its commitment to equality. Douglass's efforts would later pay off when Grant won the elections and passed the Civil Rights Act of 1871, also known as the Klan Act. The act was passed along with the Second and Third Enforcement Acts after the midterm elections, marking the administration's commitment to ensuring equality. Under the powers and provisions that came with the passage of the law, the president was allowed to exert full military might on trespassers, to which he duly obliged. Not too long after, over 5,000 people were arrested, many of whom had ties to the violent Klan sect and other disruptors of public peace. Sanity was restored to a certain degree, and Frederick wielded the influence that made this possible. Frederick's relationship with the official powers once again proved to be a most effective weapon for the betterment of African Americans and other oppressed groups and minorities. While the military action executed by President Grant earned him the praise and lifetime respect of black people, led by Douglass, it also caused great hatred of him among white people. Frederick Douglass assumed more roles under the Grant administration and subsequent ones, once serving as president of the Freedmen's Savings Bank. He also served as charge d'affaires for the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Frederick's growing influence on contemporary American politics and society continued until the 1870s. 25 years after the war ended, he continued championing voting rights and suffrage through his speeches. He would later be nominated in 1872, without his knowledge, for the role of vice president by Victoria Woodhull, on a ticket that ran on the Equal Rights Party. Although Frederick Douglass was the first African American to get this honor, he never acknowledged the ticket or campaigned for it. His growing stature did not come without its problems, and his house was set on fire by suspected arsonists earlier that year. After losing about 16 volumes of his newspaper, The North Star, in the fire, and suffering severe damage to the house and its surroundings, Douglass decided to move again to Washington, D.C. As Frederick Douglass approached the last years of his life, he supported the cause of equal rights and racial justice for all Americans. When the former Confederate states were starting to pass several laws that promoted disenfranchisement and segregation in the Jim Crow system, Douglass was on the ground to provide strong opposition. Frederick continued to speak publicly about the need to ensure that the rights of Americans, especially black Americans, were upheld. In 1877, he bought a house that would later become his resting place and renamed it the Frederick Douglass Memorial National Historic Site. At the time of his death, Frederick had taken up several roles under different administrations. His last position came under the leadership of President Rutherford Hayes, a Republican. He was also appointed the United States Marshal for the Columbia District, another first for a black man. Douglass authored several books and autobiographies that chronicled his life in slavery and as a free man. With hundreds of speeches and writings to his name and an acclaim that spread across borders, Frederick still had some unfinished business to attend to. Remarkably, he ended up reconciling with his one-time enslaver, Thomas Auld. Frederick Douglass, the present-day civil rights champion and former slave boy who worked on plantations, had the good graces to meet with his former master as he lay on his deathbed. The meeting was facilitated by Thomas's daughter Amanda years back. Yet it took some impressive grace for Frederick to agree and attend the meeting. Other people would later criticize this move, although Frederick acknowledged that it brought some closure for him. This is just one of the many inspiring stories recorded about Frederick Douglass. The incredible story of how a child born into slavery would become an essential figure in the fight against racism makes for good listening. Frederick Douglass went from being denied the opportunity to learn how to read under his enslaver to becoming one of his generation's most enlightened and exposed black men. As one of the leading black voices in the fight against racial discrimination, Frederick continued to stand and speak up when it mattered most. He used his influence to question people in positions of power to benefit his people. Whenever he needed to deploy his time, money, resources, or capacity to effect change, he never declined to help. The life led by Frederick Douglass was a tribute and testimony to the values and virtues of human dignity, sacrifice, and devotion. After his wife Anna died in 1882, Frederick was left to mourn his lifelong partner, which expectedly took a toll on him. When he later took a new wife, a white woman, eyebrows were raised, and a few people criticized his choice of partner. When Frederick got the chance to address the concerns raised by these people, Douglass opined that his marriage to a white woman was, among other things, a reminder of his commitment to bridge the racial gap in America. After several decades spent championing civil rights advocacy and equality for all regardless of race and gender, Douglass breathed his last airs at his Rochester home on the 20th of February 1895. He had just returned from a meeting of the National Council of Women in Washington, D.C., where he had been given a standing ovation after being brought to the platform. With his death in 1895, Frederick Douglass marked the end of a life that epitomizes the triumphs that could come from a lifetime of struggle. Frederick's growth from humble beginnings to playing a pivotal role in the emancipation of the black man in America is the stuff of legend. Frederick Douglass was given a burial befitting of a hero. Several high-level dignitaries attended his burial, and a few Supreme Court judges and senators played the role of pallbearers. Such was his massive influence while alive that his coffin was presented before thousands of people. The president of Howard University was on the ground to deliver a speech. He was finally laid to rest in a graveyard around Mount Hope Cemetery, Rochester. Today, Frederick Douglass's name and enduring legacy stand tall for everyone. With several prizes, places, and monuments raised to his name will continue to resonate throughout history for the impact he made. Frederick's immense lifelong contributions to the fight against racial discrimination, slavery, and inequality in America continue to be inspiring. This brings an end to today's video on our channel, People's Journals, where we bring history's most fascinating stories to life. Thanks for watching this video, and stay with us for more exciting videos like this. Remember to click the like and subscribe button for notifications each time we post videos like this.